Of all the problems in the anime industry, one might be about to change. The production committee, something most fans won't even know about. But rest assured, it is the root of all evil. For decades, the production committee has been a major way in which studios fund anime. Bigger companies come together, pooling funds to make a single show. It dominates the TV landscape, and major companies like Kadokawa commit to funding over 40 anime every year. However, they won't do that alone. Publishers, music labels, TV stations are all involved. But here's the question. What percentage do you think those animation companies who actually make the shows receive? Well, the studios are often the first to be scammed, only receiving a paltry sum in comparison, because they are often seen as subcontractors. They don't receive the benefits of other members. Even if they do invest in the committee, they can easily be cut out. It's no wonder that most anime studios are in the red. So is there a way around that? Well, in the old days, there was a relationship between the animation studio, TV stations, and a major sponsor, and that's how they'd fund anime. However, that is a risky form of funding. Usually sponsors are looking for ratings so they can sell advertising space during the breaks, alongside the merchandising side. That could also put pressure on the animation studio. Nowadays, most anime is also shown at night, and if TV ratings aren't what they used to be, well, for a different alternative, we have to look at an old dog with a new trick, Vladlove. That's a net anime vampire comedy. On the surface, it may look like every other anime you've seen, but it does have a secret. It is funded by just one company, an Akihabara real estate company known as Ichigo. Is this a devious plot to brainwash anime fans for their blood donations? I don't know, it doesn't really matter anyway. To quote them though, being the sole investor lets us give greater voice to the directors and creators. This allows them more creative freedoms compared to a traditional joint investment project, which in principle is good for the anime industry, especially if it's a way to fund original IPs, so the studio doesn't have to split funds. Ichigo chose a director who is already infamous in the anime industry too, who had been involved in creating other successful media franchises. He's known as one of the big four in otaku, Mamoru Oshii, and this would be his first anime project in 13 years, not to mention his first TV anime in like half a lifetime. The director swore off TV anime decades ago, but this was simply too good to be true. Somehow it all came together. After the director Oshii created an app called Chimamire My Love, a motion manga. The developers, Comic Animation, wanted to make more revenue from the project, while Ichigo also wanted to break into the anime industry, and anime seemed right for both of them. Everyone could win, and Oshii had to keep asking, is it really okay? It's especially rare nowadays to have a chance to create an original series based on your own idea, not to mention one where you can do whatever you want. So Oshii saw this as an opportunity to do something different than modern anime, which he thought had become too neat, bland, and harmless for its viewers. Let's show what would happen if you piss off an old man. Let's make an anime that can also serve as a strong medicine. Well, medicine doesn't always taste nice. It would be a return to comedy anime that brought him into the limelight to begin with. However, it's also a genre he hasn't worked in since the 80s. Will he be able to transition smoothly back into that style of work? Vladlove is very much a spiritual successor to Urusei Yatsura, for better or worse. It's a zany slapstick comedy that's mainly episodic, and it's going to be very familiar. So when something like Urusei Yatsura came out, it was fresh and energetic. The animation did whatever it felt, it was loose, expressive, with crazy inventive sequences. The team were just throwing stuff at the wall to see what stuck. They didn't even know how to make an anime. So Urusei Yatsura was inconsistent and all over the place, but when it was good, it was really good. Vladlove had a lot to live up to, especially since there was no popular source material it could build on. It had to depend on the director's scripts and sensibilities, which we knew were going to be old school. But just how indulgent are we talking? Well, the needs of an audience weren't a concern. Even when other staff complained to the director, there's no pretty boys, you can't have a popular show without that. Or please stop adding these long, obscure film references to French New Wave. Oshii didn't stop. He said, no, you are going to hear the entire premise of this specific New Wave film and you are going to learn to love it. The work was going to be an acquired taste, Oshii's taste specifically, and they weren't worried about being contemporary. The style of the show could have been made by Studio Dean 20 years ago, and no one would be any wiser. Karaoke dance sequences were very 2006. All the boys are these disgusting monster men who yearn to be dominated, so of course the focus is on the mature exhibitionist lady. That's something that the collaborator Nishimura learned very quickly. When he was reading the scripts, there were tears in his eyes. He bemoaned, how am I going to convert this into a storyboard? Junji Nishimura was an old colleague of Oshii's from the Urusei Yatsura days. He worked on many episodes, as well as the featured film Beautiful Dreamer. They had went through all kinds of chaos together, and ultimately, when Oshii left the studio, Nishimura went on to be a director in his own right. Decades later, Nishimura is probably one of the few people who will actually still work with Oshii, and after a sudden friendly game of mahjong, he was recruited joining Vlad Love as the series director under the general director of Oshii. Whatever Nishimura said about the anime before it was completed, the final results I don't think are too spicy. For Angry Medicine, it does feel a bit more like Grandpa shakes his fist at Cloud. It's nothing new, it can be playful, but it never crosses a line, and there are plenty of censor bars just in case. You can tell they were aiming for a television broadcast, even if they couldn't get one at first. And with every TV broadcast, we have to start with the opening, which is definitely one of the best things about the series. Maybe I should say 2, because for whatever reason, this anime that's only 12 episodes long has 2 openings, and it switches between them every episode. The first one is a heavy metal and gothic opening, focusing on the horror aspect of the show. What if the gang were rock stars? Really shredding it with some solid animation. There's finesse to the fingers, they're dancing on stage, it gets your blood pumping. It almost feels like a promo for a new musical anime. And then the second opening couldn't be more different. It's solemn, tragic in a romantic way. It feels like a ritual to see someone again, even though it's going to be fleeting. There's a sapphic energy that bleeds from the screen. And honestly, it's almost a little too tasteful for a show like this. The biggest joke, of course, is neither of these openings represent the show as a whole. I wish in some part they did, because OP2 just looks great. I love the simplified designs and the way it uses flat color with minimal shading. But it was created by an outsourcing studio, so the actual anime looks nothing close. It is what it is. And if there's any part here that's actually representative of the real show, it will be the sapphic love element, because like Urusei Yatsura, a girl falls into the main character's life. Well, maybe the word scoop slammed would be more appropriate. Well, unlike Urusei Yatsura, Mitsugu takes Mai in with full-throated enthusiasm. Does Mai feel any way about this? It's hard to say, but she seems to be up for whatever. Well, Mitsugu just wants her to live in her closet forever, so she can have a quiet life with her hypothetical 400-year-old girlfriend, who's also a vampire. I mean, can we really blame her? The character designs are strong. I think they give each girl enough unique energy. I particularly like the bags under Mitsugu's eyes, and the philosophy here is pretty funny. It's always about breaking on model. Every character's face gets mangled in these slapstick gags, which aren't in vogue these days, but as the director said, when characters move, they're bound to warp and change. It's really about if there's love in how you break that character's face, and that is very much part of the fun of the series. I think there is actually a lot of charm in how they draw that and animate all the little character motions. Their reactions are also pushed with more personality because they are exaggerated. I also like the unique background art. It's very textural, it's sometimes more of a mixture of photography and painting, where they trace a lot of real photography. I don't know if it completely meshes with the character designs and style, since they aren't super realistic and they're very flat painted. So ultimately it feels a little bit like a stage show, as characters don't also move through scenes a lot. It's not exactly too different than Urusei Yatsura, although there are elements that I think Urusei Yatsura does better. I could almost say there's something missing here in Vlad Love. Urusei Yatsura was a show that, while had a standard, it could change itself up, it could become earnest, it could become a full genre work, it could do anything it wanted between episodes. Where Vlad Love, it does have a good premise to set itself up, even if it buries a lot of its own jokes, but it kind of does follow that wacky comedy approach for most of its episodes until episode 9, that is. That's something a little out of the ordinary, which reminded me of some of my favourite episodes from Urusei Yatsura. It has an eerie quality and the story is set in a different world, it's mysterious, moodier in terms of the other show, and a different kind of art direction. This episode was definitely inspired by the famous manga Screw Style. Many elements of the concept were brought together by the episode director Misaho Nishikubo, whose specialty is creating atmosphere. Yet the limitations of Vlad Love's productions do hold it back. It lacks the cohesion in all its elements coming together. And it also doesn't really feel like it has enough animation to make the world feel alive. You're basically watching an episode that consists of background paintings and character portraits. And that's not the most engaging. It feels sometimes more like a visual novel than an anime. And that isn't exactly far from the truth, as Chima Mirei, My Love, was basically a visual novel. Vlad Love and My Love share a lot of the same plot elements, though there were things changed up here because Oshii didn't really feel the app version turned out very well. In a lot of ways, Vlad Love is a do-over, and some ideas have been refined. The protagonist is now a girl, for example, and it approaches things in its own way. One thing it did bring back from the visual novels to the anime are the portrait boxes. The director saw this as a way to reduce the number of backgrounds and compositions that needed to be drawn. He said that they'd be able to reduce the number of cuts per episode from something like 300 down to 100, which allowed them to focus on the more important scenes. And yet there's such a thing as too much. Adding so many talking head boxes creates a jarring tempo to the editing. Timing is just so important for physical comedy after all. In contrast, when you look at something like Urusei Yatsura, it very much took the idea of keeping the cuts going as long as possible. So instead of maybe 2 cuts, they might simply pop a character into another shot or find creative ways which the animators can merge the two. Where, in contrast, Vlad Love just adds a big box of another character in the frame, and it doesn't feel very nice. For something that's trying to be fast-paced, it often makes it feel like the whole show is just dragging its feet. And these techniques can be used in creative ways. The portraits could be an extension of the composition, and that's something that classic Gundam series do all the time. The episode that played with this format the most was episode 6, using them to interact with the world as part of the joke. Oshii actually storyboarded that episode, so he can actually do this. I'd say episode 6 is probably the best episode in the series, and maybe the most spiritually Urusei Yatsura. Even if the animation can be wonky, it's moving, it's playful, tongue-in-cheek, and fun. But even then I'd say it probably still has too many boxes. Hello, we're going to take a quick break to talk about my Patreon. This is the main way to fund the channel and keep things going, as YouTube is not very reliable, even at showing people my videos. So if you want to hype it up, if you want to share this video, much appreciated. This is the final video in the Mamoru Oshii retrospective series, which has been going for about 2 years now, 430 plus citations. Soon enough, I'm going to turn this whole video into a mega cut, and I'm going to add a new opening and ending to it, as well as creating a lost video in the series about all the cancelled projects Mamoru Oshii has, which will be exclusive on either Patreon or YouTube membership. So if you want to support things going forwards and see where things go, really the only way this channel is going to continue, and that is with the very kind donations of people such as Panzer Dragon should have been an arcade, Vixen Bites, KD Will, Trigger D, Secret of the Blue Water Video Please Bruh, Illy, Deep Fox, Gambroni, Evan Reeves, Lloyd Miller, Lenny, Tim James Richards, Trunks, Fox Mortar, Paul, Seamus Mum, Systematic, Karen, Doji, Jaeger, Vic Boss, DTB, Aleph, Pedro Ferreira, Archie Palmer, Kitty Cat, Oscar Britton, Luger, Ian Laser, Curtis, Alexandra Sofanoff, Axel GT, Sat, Fury Curry, Mel, and J-Buck. I would say overall the Vlad Love anime has issues. The animation isn't exactly setting the world on fire. There are a few strong cuts here and there, but it's inconsistent as a whole. It isn't up to the standards set by Production IG, who is Oshii's main studio. And it isn't Production IG. While they, as a studio, are involved in the production, they didn't do the animation. It was outsourced to a studio known as Drive, who was quite new at this time and didn't have the same accolades as IG, let's say. And it wasn't going to be the same as other Oshii anime because he had abandoned his classic layout system, which had been paramount for the last 20 years of his career, in favor of that photography method of tracing them. It's true they didn't necessarily have as much time to use his intensive layout system, so the show as a whole is flatter and less dimensional. Compositions aren't anywhere as tight, and they certainly could be tighter. There's an art to limited animation after all. Oshii is a big fan of someone like Osamu Dezaki. You'd think he'd be following this approach, and he kinda does, but it's complicated. And if you want to know about Osamu Dezaki's approaches, you can look at Shabe's video on Dezaki. One of the main areas I would bring up is postcard memories. These are basically when the animation turns into a painting on the screen. This might happen at emotional highs or the end of an episode. While Vlad Love uses them in a lot of odd spaces, it doesn't carry the atmosphere or enough variation to make this sequence as engaging because they're quite long. And you can say that for the entire show. It's almost like death by 1,000 paper cuts. There's lots of minor errors and lacking elements that I think add up and make me feel sour overall. And why is Vlad Love really like that? Well, I could say that anime is made different these days. When Urusei Yatsura was going, a lot of those episodes were driven by a small handful of dedicated key animators. Some episodes only had a few of them, but they were young and damn good. But Vlad Love lacks that kind of popularity that Urusei Yatsura does to bring in the enthusiast animators. And the industry is just a completely different place now. It's far more competitive because there are more shows coming out every year, and it's harder to retain staff. Not to mention the show came out during the pandemic, so that did not help the production in any way. They also struggled just to collect some of Oshii's longtime collaborators. Neither his colorist, his art director, nor animation directors returned. There's no Kasunori Ito this time, who in the past helped Oshii bring his ideas to screen, and neither does it have that same interplay between this writing room that Urusei Yatsura had, with so many different people bringing their ideas to the table. This time we only have one extra writer who basically there just to fill in some of the characters' backstories. And the way Oshii writes is not the most fragrant. A lot of these characters are just used as mouthpieces for himself. Each of them have maybe one quirk, but doesn't go any further, so his women really lack depth, and it feels like it just papers over those issues with meta jokes. I mean, only someone like Oshii would mention Fallout 4 this many times. I would say there's just a lack of dynamic relationships between characters, but in Urusei Yatsura, when you teamed up different characters, it could have a big impact in the style and tone of an episode. When they introduce new characters, they don't really change much in the mix, it just stays with that same formula. I will give them this one particular bit, which is so absurd. The idea of meticulously recreating the plane sequence from Patlabor 2 just for Vladlov, shot for shot, even using the same composer and musical stings, it's really next level dedication. And I can't say anything bad about Kenji Kawai, who appears in every episode. He's usually the best part of these projects. His music fits the atmosphere of each episode, and he has a bit more to play with here because he can go from light or fun to mysterious and brooding. I'd say Vladlov overall feels like a eulogy for Oshii if anything. It has lots of weird echoes to his entire career, including Urusei Yatsura, which was the show that made Oshii a rock star once upon a time, but now he's in the twilight of his career. He's 70 years old. In fact, he may even be about practice when it comes to storyboarding because he's moved away from that in a lot of his live action works. Even within the late Oshii catalogue, there is stuff that's handled this idea better. I could even look at things like Blood Friends, which was a live-action adaptation of Vladlov, which was also directed by Oshii. It's not a film I'd recommend as a whole, but there are areas where it succeeds over the anime, including the smaller in-between moments where the characters are just having fun, maybe they're eating a meal quietly, or they're having time to reflect. You kind of need that contrast with something this wacky, especially when it comes to the ending. Mai's backstory is revealed. Even if the movie had less time with the characters, the decisions the characters make have more impact, and it emphasizes that uncertain future and that the girls are united as friends, where in Vladlov, the group feels kind of random and like they may or may not hate each other. Sure, maybe if Vladlov the anime had 20 plus episodes, they'd be able to find their footing and work it out. It's not like Urusei Yatsura didn't struggle at first either, and Oshii was opening to do another season, but that request never came, and I don't think it ever will now. You know, around this time, it was Oshii's wife who asked him, why don't you just retire? Like, you're getting old, you're not with the times, and frankly, you never were. Why do you keep doing this? Well, in Oshii's mind, it was more fun to continue than not, even if it was taking its toll on him. You know, he was getting older, it was having to choose the particular type of productions he does, doing smaller ones and more of them because the longer ones were taken out of him. And when we look at something like Vladlov, I think it can be seen as a success because, like it or not, I can't see a production committee signing off on what it became. So I'd say that is a win for the team, and that team did get to come back together and make another show without a production committee. It was fully funded by the network WoW. It was called Fire Hunter. Even if Junji Nishimura was the director this time, it was still a relatively small team and Oshii was writing the scripts again. Though, I will say the team was able to fix a lot of the missteps and problems I had with Vladlov, and while using a lot of the same techniques. Even if it does have its own issues with its production as it goes, I would say Fire Hunter has a distinctive style. It also saw the return of a few Oshii veterans we didn't see before, like Ogura in the art direction, or Katachika Kisei as the animation director, who actually animated a whole episode on his own. So maybe less Oshii isn't a bad thing. I do feel that unique shows with smaller teams that don't adhere to the classic standards that we see in TV anime is something that the anime industry needs. But you can't even get to that point with a sustainable model if you don't build a dedicated in-house team of animators that you train. You can't function without that, as the yen is dropping and labour shortages continue. The cost of production is only going up, and that makes it harder for you to even secure those initial funds as a studio. Streaming services also aren't handing out money like they used to, so you really need to have everything planned beforehand. And yeah, sure, while freedom is good for the creators, you do need to think about where your financial income is coming from, because anime isn't just one product, it's a media mix. It's an ecology of media that come together to make you profits. And sometimes those profits don't even come from the anime itself. Vladlov may have tipped the scales on one side, maybe not having enough funds left to do advertising, but at the very least, Vladlov was an original net animation that wasn't locked on one streaming service, or forced into a bad deal. It had many different TV stations and streaming services that you could watch it through. It was even licensed last year for home releases. And it's important to have those different avenues because it's licensing, TV broadcasts and merchandises where anime studios themselves make the most money. And it's certain to say that they aren't the only company who've thought about moving away from the production committee in recent years. Nobara's Evangelion rebuild movies were self-funded and were a massive success for the studio. Even Studio Ghibli took notice, as A Boy and the Heron was the first of their movies not to use a production committee, and it was a reason they could also spend 7 years working on it without a deadline. The same could be said about the benefits of Shin Eva, which took a noticeable hiatus after 3.0. And it's not just movies either. MAPPA recently talked about moving away from production committees for their anime. They think it is the most important thing for them to have better financial and creative control for their studio. Look at things like their Chainsaw Man anime and movie. But these are big studios in the anime industry who can take on the financial risk. What about when it comes to smaller studios? Well, at the very least, Vlad Love shows where there's a will, there is a way.